America likes slogans and words that say something. Journalists know that. So when Utah started promoting tourism decades ago, the wordplay began. A Utah invitation. Utah, it's a different world. Discovery country. Castle country. The center of scenic America. No matter the phrase, the stories have always been there for the taking. In this bus, along with tour guides, a band, and government officials, travel writers, lured by slogans and fueled with their own words in telling Utah's story. This journey along the Mormon Pioneer National Heritage area.
I write for AAA Go magazine, which has a circulation of about 1.1 million. We thought it sounded like an interesting topic, and I'm a freelance writer, so I was picked to come.
My name is Dave Zukowski. I've been a travel writer for like 24 years. I write for a news service called Community Newspaper Holdings Incorporated. It's a consortium of about 86 papers across the U.S. And I also write for two travel blogs and Pathfinders magazine.
Hi, I'm Joyce Wiles. I'm a freelance writer from Southern California, and I've come to Utah on behalf of American Road, which likes locales like this with real authentic restaurants, motels, and the people who are extremely genuine also.
My name is Jonathan Miltimore. I'm an editor with the History Channel magazine, and I'm doing a feature story on the beautiful state of Utah.
In Panguitch, Utah, the travel writers find a small, quiet town and a story about a quilt walk.
I think the important thing to remember is that the first settlement here in 1864, the crops didn't develop too well, and that first winter, the community was in danger of starving.
The burden of acquiring food now lay heavily on the shoulders of the 7 men bound for Parowan. Traveling by wagon, they were able to make fairly good progress on the first stage of their journey.
They got over in Bear Valley area. The snow was getting pretty deep, and they finally got to where they had to abandon their cart in the rocks and walk. They took their quilts with them.
Feelings of exhaustion came quickly as the men overexerted themselves while their legs sunk deep in the snow, fighting what seemed to be a losing battle. Under these conditions, it was apparent that the journey would be impossible, and it was at this point that they were about to give up.
They had a prayer circle, and they put the quilts down on the snow and knelt and had this prayer, and they noticed that kneeling on the quilts, they didn't sink into the snow. So they said, that's our answer.
This inspired an effort to continue their trek, walking on their blanket by painstakingly laying one blanket after another to create a quilted pathway across the mountain.
And they made it to Parowan, and they got the foodstuffs, but they were successful, and they got back, and so that's known as the Panguitch Quilt Walk. It's a wonderful event for 3 days here.
And a monument reminding everyone how important the story is. The Hole in the Rock Passage, carved out of solid rock by Mormon pioneers in the 1880s.
Oh my goodness. So the 3-year-old stayed put?
Well, no man with any sense could leave his children there and let his wife and one old horse hold back a wagon load as it passed down through that chute and then plunged on down toward hell on that sandstone chute we dared to call it love.
There are so many things that I think people from outside of the state could come and discover. We have beautiful red rock canyons. We have mostly what we're discovering on this trip are the people, the communities, the richness of these communities that are available, and I think that it's an undiscovered nugget that we need to expose more of in the state of Utah.
From a riveting story of survival to a sweet serenade on the range.
Ooh, we dance through the sagebrush on an outcrop of sandstone we whirl. Tall grass and wildflowers sway to the music, the waltz of a cowboy and girl.
There's a bit of irony in this story, the story about a man who left the highway and truck driving to find his place in the world, and he found it, just down the road here, near Spring City, Utah.
On a hill far away stood...
Meet Don Walker, a patriotic man, Vietnam vet, cowboy, former truck driver who sings religious songs and is not afraid to admit he once looked down on artists.
I'm just an old dumb truck driver cowboy that didn't think I was an artist, in fact kind of looked down on artists. And it turns out that I've got some artist in me, and this has released it, and I love it. I draw and stitch all my own patterns. Nobody gets the same pattern as anyone else. We want everything to blend in nice and smoothly. We don't want any sharp corners. You fit the foot. That's the most important part of my boots, is how they fit. How they look's important. That's important. But that's not the most important. If they don't fit, I don't care if they're $1,000 boots. If they don't fit, throw them in the trash.
When Walker's son was serving in Iraq, he turned to his own artistic boot making as a way of coping.
It made me feel closer to him somehow. He was there because he was a patriot, not because he thought that we needed to take over Iraq. He was there because his country asked him to be there, and that's how I feel about it. I'm a patriot, and that made me feel a little bit closer to my son, building those boots.
Walker does work on saddles, a few display saddles, others for working cowboys. But the boots are his main business, and real cowboys, wranglers, buy them and wear them to make a living out here in the American West.
And I'll cherish the old rugged cross.
Inside his roadside shop, while the trucks keep rolling by, the artist who found himself, the bootmaker with a song in his heart, keeps working on his small-town American recital.
Cross and exchange it someday for a crown.
Chimney Rock is actually the Moenkopi, but a member of the Chinle is the Shinnerup.
All visitors to Capitol Reef National Park find an amazing composite.
Who knows what this is? It's a warm pack. It's a hot water bottle.
This is one of the best places that we have to reinforce what we've been teaching all the school year. We teach about Utah history. And so when we come here to Capitol Reef, the kids just have a chance to see firsthand what it might have been like.
Can you show me where the fruit orchards are?
So there's some like right across the street. There are a lot in the Fruita area.
And oh yes, about the fruit orchards.
Historically, it had major significance for the people who settled along the Fremont River because of the climate. Fruita was ideal for growing fruit, whereas the upper towns were not suitable for growing fruit.
When the fruit is on, the public can pick and eat fruit right from the orchards. In the off-season, well, this is the place.
Strawberry rhubarb is probably the most traditional flavor because they would have raised rhubarb and they all grew strawberries. So this is probably one of the oldest varieties that we have.
A visit to Wasatch Academy in Mount Pleasant, Utah today, and you would find one of the most diverse institutions anywhere. But oh, how different it was in the beginning.
Wasatch Academy was founded April 17th, 1875, by an intrepid Presbyterian minister who was in Salt Lake City and had a desire to come down to central and southern Utah and spread the Presbyterian mission as it was represented in the West.
He wanted to go to central Utah. They tried to discourage him. They said, there's never been anyone other than Mormons in this particular area. You're taking your life in your hands. But he was pretty determined. So they finally agreed to give him a small salary of $1,000 per year as a missionary to Sanpete County.
We are in front of Liberal Hall. This was the original building that Pastor Duncan McMillan preached his first sermon in, and this is where they held their church services and Sunday school eventually, and then eventually, when he started Wasatch Academy, which was just a little after the church began, this was the first building that institution made.
Humble beginnings for him, though, is it?
Very.
Reverend McMillan, being a well-educated Presbyterian minister, they went to him to provide the educational options they were seeking in this community, and he willingly obliged. So he took over Liberal Hall, and it was renamed Wasatch Academy. He picked the name of the school from the mountains that run along this beautiful Sanpete Valley, the Wasatch Mountains, and he named it the school Wasatch Academy with the hope and the desire that the school would endure like the mountains.
There were many private schools, but Duncan McMillan's seemed to have been the beginning of things, and we have a great debt to him for that particular contribution to Mount Pleasant.
He was a minister, but he was also an educator and devoted to the idea of expanding the educational mission of creating schools. And he did that very successfully here in central and southern Utah, establishing in a very short period of time a network of schools, of which Wasatch Academy is the last one that is continuously operating.
The Presbyterian minister, Duncan McMillan, his legacy of mission schools and churches remains a stunning benchmark.
And it started to feel a little like a ghost story to me. Anyway, this is the story of Robert Leroy Parker.
I'm Robert Leroy Parker. I was born of goodly folks. They dressed me up in modest clothing, taught me all the cleanest jokes, and I'm headed for a fine career. I'll start here by and by. Gonna steal me a pair of blue jeans, help myself to a slice of pie, help myself to a slice of pie, help myself to a slice of pie. Leave some sorry soul an IOU and take his pants and pie.
There's nothing more like home than Mom's Pie. And when you travel through the heart of southern Utah, you really feel like you're coming home to Mom's Pie. It's a place where you'll meet people, you'll experience things that make you feel at home, and You learn so many interesting things that it's a delight.
I just think that places like this, like Mom's Cafe, are more authentic.
Thank you. That looks really good.
And here you get to meet the owner, the mom and pop owners of the place, and you enjoy really good food.
In the early 1900s, somewhere near here in what is now Gunnison, Utah, a handful of Jewish families gathered and staked their claim to the future, part of the Back to the Land movement. Escaping sweatshops, crowded cities, and poverty, they sought opportunity and a better way of life. They cleared 1,500 acres of land, planted wheat, alfalfa, and oats, and gave birth to Clarion, Utah.
He didn't come in here. He didn't stay. No, he didn't stay here. He went from Utah to Nebraska. Then they ended up in the Catskills.
Yeah, it's too weird.
And then after the Second World War, moved to Los Angeles.
Perhaps they moved early.
It's the 100th year anniversary of the settlement of Clarion, Utah, which is where my father was born, and my grandfather was one of the original settlers.
My father and my uncle were little boys in Clarion, and all of my life, it's been a part of my life.
Well, I've for years been really fascinated by the idea of a utopia and sort of the idea that I came from people who up and left and wanted to make a better life.
More than a century after the utopia failed, a busload of descendants returned.
Clarion, yes, this is where, look, it's got the Clarion for you. First, when I was younger, my father telling me stories about being a boy in Clarion. And they were little boy stories. You know, he talked about collecting stones and putting them in tin cans and finding an abandoned shack. They had a club they called the Stony Gang. He told me about going to school. He told me about how cold it was in the winter, but he never really told me the real story. And gradually over the years, I found it out.
Many problems weighing on our hearts, till we know what's on each mind without a word. And Papa says he sure will see the day.
By the time they leave this historic Star Theater, they will know more of the story.
We're here. We lived in a one-room house. The 8 of them lived in the one-room house.
And you guys learned the history and process of learning the program.
It's a great history. I felt a real connection performing it.
It was a string of setbacks. First heavy rain that swamped their canal and flooded their fields. Then an early frost, followed by a dismal harvest. A second season, one more try, 2,400 promising acres planted, but water, this time necessary for the crops, not available. It was the death knell for the colony. And the last stop, an apron of vacant soil and sagebrush, Clarion itself. They step into an impolite wind and upon an alluring, uncompromising land. Where they will get a chance to understand failure and lost hope.
This whole feeling of going back to the land is such a powerful thing, and to hear about people who did this 100 years ago, to me, has a lot of resonance.
But my father didn't talk about it at all.
My grandmother was here, and it was very, very difficult.
An open-air testimonial, a few abbreviated Clarion moments seemed to be enough. Then it was all over.
I think history and family in the context of immigrants coming to America and finding their own American story.
What I've really learned here is what this colony meant, not only just to me, but to the people in Utah.
After the demise of the ill-fated Jewish colony, others did move into the area. As for the Jewish settlers, they moved on. Many returned to the East Coast. Some stayed in other parts of Utah.
We're glad to have our traveling companions all here with us now. We've saved the best for last.
I've lived in Utah for 30 years, and I don't think I have experienced Utah like I've experienced Utah in the last 4 days.
I'm so glad that you get to go to school and how to shoot horses.
I'm going to tell you a little bit something about the way writers work. I do a lot of this. I've been writing for 30 years. What we do is we do a little research before we come. We write and observe when we're here, and then when we go home, we do a lot more research. So that's kind of the way we work.
I would say that this is a real slice of Americana with gorgeous scenery to boot. And we've gone through wonderful little towns and ranching areas and farm areas. And I'm glad to see that they still exist today.
A great part of history is finding compelling stories.
That looks just like my father.
What are you going to do about this?
I'm going to share it.
I've learned that Utah has a whole bunch of very powerful stories, and that people both in Utah and outside of Utah, when they come here and they see the beautiful land, they see just how impressive the landscape is, and they hear these stories, that people will be coming to Utah.
Oh yeah, remember all those old slogans? Who knows if they really worked or helped the story along anyway? But some are certainly better than others.